thanks for joining us. And my first question and how I want to start this is really getting a sense of an introduction from you, Richard, on how did you get into this space, and what made you decide that DeFi, crypto, Web3 was something worth getting into, and then more broadly as well, how do you define the space, because it is extremely dynamic and a lot of people have different definitions. So what are the parameters that you go by when you look at this area?
I had been an entrepreneur building a software company in what you could think of as Web 1, where we dealt with the challenges at scale of configuring the new data network that was being built, commonly known as the internet, and using open source to do that, which was actually relatively rare at that point in time. An open source implementation of a ITU standard called Corba in the form of OmniOrb. So I was very familiar with the emerging open source software ecosystem and movement. And then we IPO'd that and then sold it to Oracle. And then I helped Axel Partners set up in Europe. And then I was looking at what was emerging next. And actually at that time, was sort of somehow excited by, even romantically taken with, the notion of the semantic web, which was put out there by Tim Berners-Lee as the kind of natural next evolution of the web. And it turned out actually that Web 1 obviously crashed, and then very soon after that Web 2 emerged. Web 2 was not the semantic web. Web was, and some would argue that Web 2 was kind of Web 1 done right. Actually kind of valuable and useful. And we can go into it a little bit, but it's basically because of the emergence of cloud and mobile and social, which were massive magnifying effects for the effectiveness of the software applications that were being built, the availability of them, the fact you have identity and reputation and so forth, and referability behind all of these applications meant that we now have Uber and Facebook Mobile and Instagram and so forth. So that was Web 2. Whilst Web 2 was being built, the attempt to build a semantic web where you essentially have composable running software capabilities that are reusable kind of floundered. It was actually called Web Services, the implementations back in the day. And I sort of witnessed that happen. And then if you roll forward post my second company, which built something into the application automation space, where I had looked at the challenges of augmenting human activity using AI and using rich sort of data sets, at least was using kind of some basic semantic reasoning and machine learning primitives. I appreciated kind of like two things. One, that the semantic web, this sort of loosely coupled environment of running software that would facilitate a faster rate of innovation than we'd seen even with open source, was not working because trustlessness, the ability for one piece of software to trust another, had not been delivered. And I also appreciated that the task of getting humans to collaborate around the data that they produce in their everyday life or even their work life is incredibly hard without a kind of native incentive structure. So then, but ultimately it is all about getting individuals to collaborate. That's the only way anything of any description, whether it be mundane or revolutionary, has ever been achieved in the world. And so when I stumbled into kind of Bitcoin between 2009 and 2013, and blockchain and the concept that was being discussed there of decentralized autonomous organizations, that along with, I think, others, 2013, 2014, famously, when sort of Gav Wood first sort of coined the phrase Web3. And we had actually co-hosted Gav at one of the very earliest launch events of Ethereum in January 2014 when he had done that. Saw that this new invention, if you can think of it as a prototype of Bitcoin, that demonstrated that you could deliver elements of finance that didn't rely on central parties or let alone central banks. Topical now as we kind of get into discussions about stable coins and different versions thereof in light of the current drama with Luna. But that was possible and could be used as an incentivization structure in order to mobilize individuals, and on top of that, that what it also prototyped and demonstrated was this trustless environment. This situation where you could produce a stable coin, you could produce a lending protocol, you could produce a decentralized social media sharing protocol. I was just debating with somebody earlier today the need for building a decentralized social media discovery protocol, which is kind of could be akin to the way in which decentralized exchanges work without having a centralized order book, because it's kind of, wallet to contract, contract to wallet. That all of these elements can operate essentially autonomously, can be kind of governed, or autonomously using decentralized forms of governance, and can be brought together and composed into yet more complicated applications. So that kind of creates an acceleration of the rate of innovation, as I said, which is even greater than that we've seen with the advent of open source software itself. And so not all of those pennies dropped at the same time, and not all of them dropped within sort of the 2012, 13, 14 timeframe. But we, I guess, at Fabric, including my partners, Stephen Waterhouse, Julien Thévenard, Max Birch, and Neil Hansen, and so forth, were around as the concept of decentralized finance in Bitcoin blockchain, and then what was more possible on the more general purpose smart contract platform that is Ethereum started emerging. We were already looking at the space and saw the potential for building something that had that rate of innovation at its heart, that actually is interesting because it's got a level of impartiality and inclusivity to it intrinsically, because of all the networks that are built are open and permissionless and programmatic, and at least to some very great degree do not have bias built into them because they don't involve humans. And then importantly, so they've got the innovation rate, they've got the inclusivity built into them. And I think, if you reflect on why innovation is important in terms of financial services products, in my mind's eye, I've always pictured it as there's this kind of envelope of utility, kind of price, product, packaging, feature mix in financial services that is almost infinite, and driven a lot by kind of risk preference, but as well as the particular situation and purpose of an individual. And historically, because every single financial services product has had to relate back to a central authority or many different central authorities, the rate at which innovation has taken place has been extremely slow. And historically, because it's had to be highly regulated kind of as an afterthought, which makes sense because you want to protect people, it's become even slower and brittle. It's almost an ossified industry with a lot of concentration of power in those who happen to have the capital and have established that trust with regulators. Because of all of that, I would argue that there are actually not, if you take sort of a farmer in Senegal, or you take a kind of Albanian who's moved to the UK, or whatever situation it is, business or personal, there isn't actually necessarily a product for that person at that time that suits them financially and that they are allowed to access. In fact, most, I would say, whatever, so 80% plus of the financial products required in the world, maybe it's 90% or plus or whatever, just do not exist, let alone, do not have distribution to the end user. And so when you have this rate of innovation, you have the intrinsic inclusivity of this kind of movement, and perhaps most importantly, you have something that is perceived historically as the Achilles heel of this space, which is that it doesn't come under today's regulatory kind of umbrellas, is actually its greatest strength, because it's transparent, it's data driven, it's automated, from the get-go, and which means you can actually bake regulation and compliance in, not as an afterthought, but intrinsically into the way that things operate, which doesn't happen automatically, of course, but can be done and is being done. Then you've got, this is a kind of like a bit of a perfect storm, a triple sort of whammy, if you will, for driving financial products that can can be ultimately, the way I sometimes look at it, can be baked into every moment that you have as an individual, as a business, and be there to support whatever activity you're doing. At the end of the day, financial products are there to kind of manage the risk of whatever endeavor you're engaged in over some sort of time frame, and so it should be able to do that for you so transparently. And we almost, rather than even calling it DeFi, a phrase I've coined historically, I think I've coined it, is was kind of no-fi, or kind of zero-fi, which is to say that if software is eating the world and our software is able to make and keep financial promises or commitments, then it should be able to do, and so your every activity in your daily world involves software. Well, now software can take care of the financing aspect of what you do, as part of your activity, it just transparently or opaquely, whichever you want to look at it, whichever you want to look at it, in the background. And so I think that's where we're going to, and that it's a bit of a nirvana in terms of kind of real-time, perfectly risk-adjusted financial products delivered to everybody, everywhere. But I think that is definitely the direction of travel, and I guess that sounds like a good thing. And so that's why it's sort of exciting. It's exciting on a kind of human level, but definitely exciting in terms of pace, innovation, and opportunity to back great founders.
There's a lot of things you've talked about there. It's I'm trying to figure out which way to go. But you started with, I think you talked a lot about Web3 in particular here, and I guess that's your foundation, your background, right? How do you, there's one part is, how do you define that specifically? And then more broadly, going into the inclusion side, and you've mentioned this a little bit so far already, particularly towards the end there. And you talked about farmers in Senegal. There's two sides to the coin from an inclusion point of view. One is, this global, unbanked, underserved community, which is, like you said, the farmers in Senegal. How do you deliver a decentralized financial solution? How do you deliver Web3 to people like that? How do you deliver those kinds of solutions? And what do you think, what do you think are those solutions that you can offer there? Is there anything in your portfolio that, you're investing in, and you have you're taking an approach and investing in a space? And then, more broadly, there's the, underserved consumers and underserved communities within European and Western markets, where they can make better use of financial services, or they can improve their transacting or improve their finances through these kinds of solutions that can promote inclusion. Is there, can you talk a little bit to those points, and do you have any ideas?
Yeah. So we, you can go back to 2015, and either BitPesa or BitOasis BitPay's changed its name now. Oasis is doing pretty well in the UAE kind of Middle East environment. But we looked at both of those investments. I was a bit thwarted by my sort of lack of funds in terms of being able to move fast enough to invest in them. But there's actually another story there. But they've both done pretty well. And then more recently, we are backers of Yellow Card, which is allowing you to buy and sell crypto online with kind of a focus on inclusivity and a focus on Africa, and multiple payment options, security, understanding the specific needs of the user in that space. BitPayza, for what it's worth, BitOasis is an exchange, but BitPayza was a remittance service, so a way to pay people their salaries in Africa for local companies, but also for multinationals, integrated with M-Pesa, for example, and so has done pretty well. I think that Africa possibly, as an example, has an opportunity to as it already has done with kind of mobile banking, kind of to leapfrog some of the establishment of the kind of the developed world, or the existing banking system, and maybe come up with sort of innovative solutions that are directly responsive to the needs of the many different customer segments that obviously exist out there. Their particular, with the way, what they want to pay for, what they want to pay with, how they want to pay, when they want to do that, how they want to save, how they want to share that with their family and whatever. That I think then there's an opportunity to kind of innovate like that. I would say, yeah, I hope that was some kind of useful response for you.
Sorry, and yeah, that's helpful. And actually, touching as well earlier, you mentioned regulation. How do you regulate the space? What do you see the development of a regulatory infrastructure? How do you see that relationship progressing?
Yeah, so we are just about to. I mean, we've been involved in conversations with the UK government, with the European government, all the way back in 2014. I was working with the US government on the regulatory status of centralized exchanges and so forth, and now increasingly looking at questions about stable coins and layer ones and foundations and so forth. We are about to launch an initiative called DAPA, actually, Digital Asset Policy Alliance. I think there are a lot of initiatives popping up at the moment, and I think the main point really is that this is a new. It's a new, software computing paradigm. It's a new paradigm for applications, and it's definitely a new paradigm for regulation. And so, even at the, when you have got an environment where, and we've written some pieces like this about this, where you're defining the vernacular to even express a taxonomy for the characteristics of a financial instrument, when you're doing that. Then it's obviously quite hard to take a regulatory regime and framework and set of terms and approaches or whatever that was defined for a different environment. So we've got an undefined environment, fast moving, and then a historical environment, and then somehow try and connect the two. It's just like, whatever, someone who speaks Australian talking to someone who speaks Swahili or whatever, and it's just it's orthogonal. It's round peg and square hole. And so I think there is that realization that one needs to think from first principles about what to do, and that, and actually that will help us hopefully embrace the opportunity to use the advantages I mentioned, as I think crypto capital markets are going to consume today's capital markets. I'm still, totally sure that's the case. And it's because of the things that I just described, but particularly, I think, because of the ability to be much better in terms of dealing with money laundering and compliance and so forth than today's capital markets have been able to. Because otherwise compliance is a huge overhead. it's a pain basically for everybody. It's a friction on the economy and on individuals. And I think we can address that using some clever software. And without humans involved, of course, we all know if humans are involved, it's potentially corruptible, which is, of course, what happens. And I've never seen the numbers done, but if we kind of speculated widely, if you look at the issues of kind of money laundering that have existed in like everywhere from Deutsche Bank to Danske Bank to, I think, Morgan Stanley, I hope that's right, but definitely the first two. And the fine, how much money was handled and the fines that took place, that's all much bigger than anything that's ever happened in the world of decentralized finance, as I said, and I think there's good prospects. So I think it's being addressed, and there's people realize that there's an opportunity there and it needs to be done, work that needs to be done afresh. I will say the other thing we need to dodge is that this is just the regulation is by its very nature political, and so we just need to be careful that political issues or issues that appeal to the electorate, that are popular with the electorate, like, for example, and even very worthy ones like, are we killing the planet, are not used to deflect the kind of direction of travel that we currently have. So I'm talking about, focusing entirely just on the kind of proof of work challenge, and the electricity consumption there, without digging in and realizing actually proof of work has been driving the renewables side of the power generation industry in a way that means that probably it's a net benefit to the quantity of sort of carbon emissions across the global economy. That's a separate topic, but one of my favorite ones. And then, but that's being used as a way of sort of detracting from the progress within this space, because that recently the EU sort of stepped in to try and see if they could outlaw any cryptocurrency that had proof of work behind it. So we need to dodge things like that. But I think there's, by and large, I think there's a growing realization that, if you will, slightly from kind of governments and regulators, that this is not going to be beaten out or into submission, and so therefore they need to join what's going on and build on it. And so each time that there's more work done on that, I think that's positive for Web3 and for decentralized finance in general.
Yeah, 100%. I'm conscious of your time, so I have one last question, and around the investment side of things, and how do you see the investment landscape evolving in this area, and what's your thesis? What's your approach for investing here? So far we've seen $33 billion invested in 2021, and $15 billion so far this year in Q1. What's the approach for the future, and what is Fabric Ventures doing, and what's your approach?
Yeah, so I think obviously there's been a big swell of capital, a big wave of capital coming into the space. I think the market, there's an irony in this space that when prices go down, people then tend to get a bit shy. Ironically, this is now probably a better time to be investing, and so I think that will happen for the more sophisticated investors, and I would like to think that Fabric is counted amongst those. We have a venture capital fund writing kind of single-digit million checks in the market. We have a super early stage fund operating from inception, looking to get Web2 and academic talent into the space, writing 100K plus checks. And we have a growth fund also in the market, writing 5 to 10 million checks, even looking at some what I call a growth plus tickets, 25, 50 million plus in some situations. So we have 3 closed-end funds, and we have a fund specifically designed to give liquidity to decentralized networks, DeFi ones, gaming ones, but I guess of note here, DeFi ones. It's called Fabric Capital, and so all 4 of those fund pockets are we think are available to different parts of the life cycle, to address different needs for the founders in this space. And then we continue to operate the way we're familiar with, that is as founders and operators, and kind of try and contribute to everything from ideation to talent sourcing to token economics to connecting with market infrastructure to business development to policy connections to fundamental research around bonding curves and voting techniques in decentralized autonomous organizations, all of this stuff. And so we'll continue doing that, and we'll continue deploying. And I think I coined a phrase at UCL actually that and I used it again at our offsite, that Mike Novogratz at Galaxy is famous for saying that we're the kind of the herd of institutional investors is coming. If there's a herd of 100 buffalo or bison, whatever, about to come, we're about half a buffalo in, I would have said at this point in time. It's super early days, but they are coming, gradually in waves, in cycles. But this last cycle has brought even more talent to the space, and I think you're going to see that in the next wave of products that get built.
Cool. And does inclusion fit into your approach from how you decide on who you're investing in?
Well, I think, as I said, it just comes naturally with the nature of what we're investing in. So it's swept up in that. That's one of its core characteristics that's positive. And I think it's natural part of the whole movement, actually, that inclusivity, the supremacy, the primacy of the individual is absolutely central to this, and the power that is unlocked when you give people a stake in things and a share of the upside and mutual ownership of these things. We think of many of these institutions being built as kind of like modern mutuals. So it's back to the kind of concept of a building society or a mutual, but now applied to lots of other things in financial services and beyond. So I think it's naturally inclusive. But yes, over and above that, yes, we also do everything we can to think about where the opportunity to be inclusive on a sort of global kind of basis is, including looking at opportunities in Africa and Middle East and Asia and so forth. I think we're going to be doubling down actually on we will be on elements of that. We have our own cycle of kind of getting bits in place and getting the firm built, and now I think there's a good window of opportunity in the probably over the summer actually to kind of express some of our desire to support diversity, inclusivity, and sustainability in what it is that we do. Then some really interesting projects coming up across those, including sustainability.